As magical and mysterious as it is, the Pokemon world is also deeply scientific. You're usually introduced to this world by a professor, a person who studies Pokemon scientifically. At the start of every game, there's that classic character who says, "Technology is so amazing." One of the main objectives of the game, completing the Pokedex, is essentially research, and there are tons of Pokedex entries that are explicitly about ecology, food chains, or trying to explain the more magical elements in a scientific, or at least a pseudo-scientific light. Pokemon loves to introduce new mons, or even new features or gameplay elements as new discoveries. And what really drives this home is Pokemon evolution, a term so strongly scientific, it turned religious groups against the franchise from the beginning.
I forgot about that.
But if you know anything about biology, you know that evolution in the real world doesn't mean what it means in the Pokemon world. This is the 4th video in my series looking at various aspects of the Pokemon world through the lens of language. It's not essential that you catch up with all 3 previous videos before watching this one, but I do recommend you watch at least the first one to get a good foundation. The word evolution in biology describes the gradual process through which species change over time. It is not a process that affects individuals. What we call evolution in Pokemon is more akin to metamorphosis, a rapid change that an individual organism undergoes in the natural course of their lives. Things like caterpillars turning into moths or tadpoles turning into frogs. So if Game Freak were going for a scientific conception of the Pokemon world, why not go for the more accurate word, metamorphosis? Well, Nob Ogasawara, who translated the first 4 generations of Pokemon games, points out how metamorphosis is a rather difficult word for a game targeting 10-year-olds, especially if you also consider that many people playing these games are even younger than that. But maybe even more important, it's a physically huge word, 13 characters long, and in the Game Boy games, each line of text was only 17 characters long. So if they used metamorphosis, we'd be seeing tons of cases where that's the only word on a line, and as a book designer and typesetter, I can tell you that does not look good.
Yes, and evolution, evolve, those are easy to connect to each other, but metamorphosis, metamorphose, one of those is not very common.
That is Kara, PhD linguist, who is helping me through this series.
It's why I think in a lot of things we use morph. It's easier to use morph, but morph does not have any of the connotations of metamorphosis and is not scientific at all.
So metamorphosis wouldn't really be a great choice in English, at the very least for practical reasons. But the Japanese terms don't necessarily have those same limitations. And yet, Pokemon evolution in Japanese is Shinka, which also means evolution.
The translation is really accurate, right? The word Shinka that they use, it's what they use for evolution. It's not what they would use for metamorphosis, right? Which would be, henka, or change into something different. This one means change, moving forward, like continuing forward, making progress. And I think that's actually sort of an interesting choice. In one way, using the word for evolution is good because it enhances the sort of scientific aspect of it. It also isn't necessarily the wrong word, even though it's the wrong meaning, because although we consider, scientifically, evolution is randomized and it's not progress and moving forward. Even in English, we do have that usage of it, right? The things evolving means they get better. And that's not what evolution was supposed to mean, but it's how we use it.
So really, the problem isn't that evolution is used wrong. It sort of isn't. It's just using the colloquial definition of the term. And in fact, most people won't find it confusing. You can understand that Pokemon uses evolution in a different way than it's used in biology.
And I can get the scientific vibe from it without having to really worry about whether it matches or not, because it's so different that it doesn't actually matter that it could mean this in another context. I know that in Pokemon world it means this, and that's manageable.
But it's a bit weird and honestly a little bit disappointing that they're using a scientific term to give the game and the world that scientific vibe, but not using the scientific meaning of it. Just for a comparison's sake, Digimon also uses Shinka for evolution, but that got localized as Digivolution. So it still has that connotation of progress, but it doesn't sound scientific anymore. If Pokemon had used Poke-evolution, I still wouldn't like it, but it would be for different reasons. There's another word I want to talk about that interacts with this scientific feel of the Pokemon world, and that's gender. In Pokemon, gender refers to sex, like whether the Pokemon is male, female, or unknown. But the term gender is not about biology or genetics. It's about culture and social roles. And unlike evolution, this is an issue that arises from the localization. From what I understand, the Japanese term seibetsu can be used to mean either gender or sex. But in English, it is not the same word or the same concept. So going with gender as opposed to sex was a choice that the localization team made. Knob speculates that this also had to do with the game's target audience, as well as with the game's rating, which was E10 for everyone 10 and up. Rather than having little kids going to their parents and initiate awkward conversations about sex, it was probably easier to use the safer gender. That was probably the case, but using gender to mean sex just reinforces the misconception that those two things are the same.
Yeah, it reinforces that equation that is already a little too prevalent. It's a safe choice, but it's also definitely an incorrect choice, which adds a lot of problems to that.
In particular, it denies the existence of trans and non-binary people whose sex assigned at birth doesn't match their gender identity. It's the same problem as asking, are you a boy or a girl at the beginning of every game? There are people who are neither. Pokemon thankfully dropped that question, starting with Pokemon Go and Generation 7, but we're still calling Pokemon sex gender.
Yeah, it also is pushing away from the scientific part because, like, that is something that you get when you're, like, you know, studying animals. You're like, oh, this is how reproduction works, and this is a very important thing to learn about. And so, like, you know, it does seem like it's another place where you know, they could have pushed it more in an actually scientific direction, but they did not.
In the sense of how the term gets used in Pokemon, gender is sort of like the opposite of evolution. It isn't a biological term, but it is used with a biological meaning, and using it that way sort of hides the biological nature of Pokemon breeding. We're making assumptions here, of course, but if the point of using gender is to not make people think about sex too much, isn't it too late considering we're talking about Pokemon reproduction?
I think it's also really interesting, like, that, like, they all lay eggs, right? You know, that's totally fine. Eggs are an essential part of the reproductive process. But it also does seem like they're like, you know what will create much less people worrying about the sex parts of these things? Eggs. So, like, them trying to steer people away from thinking about sex parts even when they're talking about breeding.
Well, there is a reason nursery workers never see an egg be produced. But it still feels really strange to me that in a game that directly encourages you to get your Pokemon to reproduce, because there are some Pokemon you can't get any other way, just using the word sex would be going too far.
Yes. That's how the world works.
I know, but it's weird. If you have any other terms with more of a scientific bend that you want to discuss, let's head down to the comment section. There is one more video to come in this series about the differences between legendary and mythical Pokemon. I hope you look forward to it. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all of the Libros who support my work, especially luxury patron Ethan from Chicago. I'll see you in the next chapter. The word biology in evolution describes the gradual process through which species change over time.